Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the starship Unity and watched the massive planet grow larger on the main screen. Paraxis Prime looked like a ball of fire floating in space, with red and orange clouds swirling around its surface. This was the home world of the Draconians, and Jake had never seen anything like it before. "Are you ready for this, Commander?" asked Captain Lisa Rodriguez as she walked up beside him. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the worry hidden underneath. This mission was important for both their species, and everyone knew it. Jake nodded and adjusted his blue diplomatic uniform, as ready as anyone can be when meeting dragons for the first time. He looked at the planet again and wondered what the next few days would bring. The Draconians had agreed to meet with humans, but nobody knew what to expect from creatures that could breathe fire and live for thousands of years. Dr. Alex Turner joined them at the front of the bridge, carrying a thick tablet filled with notes about Draconian culture. Alex had spent months studying everything they could find about the dragon-like aliens. "Remember, they value strength and honor above everything else," Alex said while scrolling through the information. "They also have a very strange sense of humor that we don't fully understand yet." The Unity moved through the outer atmosphere of Paraxis Prime, and Jake felt the ship shake slightly from the thick air. Through the windows, he could see massive cities built into the sides of active volcanoes. Bridges of what looked like hardened lava connected floating platforms where dragons flew between tall spires that reached up into the clouds. "Incoming message from the surface," reported the communications officer. The main screen changed to show a massive dragon with scales that shined like polished gold. The creature had eyes like burning coals and teeth longer than Jake's arm. "Welcome, small ones from the distant star called Sol," the dragon said in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. "I am High Regent Zephyr Stormscale, ruler of the 7th Flame Dynasty. You may land your vessel at the coordinates we are sending now." Jake stepped forward and gave a formal bow that Alex had taught him during their preparation. "Thank you for welcoming us to your world, High Regent. I am Commander Jake Morrison, representing the United Human Coalition. We are honored by your invitation." The dragon's massive head tilted slightly, as if studying Jake through the screen. "Honored, you say? We shall see about that, little human. Land quickly. The ceremony begins when the third moon rises, and Draconian time waits for no one." The screen went dark, and Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There had been something in the dragon's tone that he didn't like, but he couldn't figure out exactly what it was. The Unity landed at a spaceport that looked more like a crater filled with polished black stone. Dragons of different sizes and colors watched from high perches as the human delegation walked down the ship's ramp. Jake had expected to feel small next to the dragons, but actually seeing them in person was overwhelming. Even the youngest ones were twice as tall as any human, and their wings could easily cover a small building. High Regent Zephyr Stormscale waited for them at the bottom of the ramp, surrounded by other important-looking dragons wearing golden chains and jeweled bands around their necks. Up close, Jake could see that the High Regent was ancient beyond belief. Scars covered his massive body, and his scales had the deep shine that came from centuries of life. "So these are the famous humans," Stormscale said, his voice making the ground vibrate under their feet. "You are smaller than I expected. Much smaller." Several of the other dragons made sounds that Jake realized were probably laughter. Lisa stepped forward with a diplomatic smile. "Size isn't everything, High Regent. We hope to prove that humans can be valuable allies despite our physical differences." "Allies?" Stormscale repeated, and more laughter came from the gathered dragons. "Oh, this should be most entertaining. Follow me, tiny humans. Let us see what you are truly made of." They walked through streets made of volcanic glass, while crowds of dragons watched from above. Jake noticed that many of them were pointing and making what seemed like jokes in their own language. The younger dragons seemed especially amused. By the human visitors, the ceremony hall was a massive cave carved into the heart of a mountain. Lava flows had been redirected to create patterns on the walls that glowed with red and orange light. Hundreds of dragons filled the space, their eyes reflecting the firelight like tiny stars. Jake, Lisa, and Alex were seated at a table that seemed ridiculously small compared to the massive stone platforms where the dragons rested. Servants brought them food that didn't burn their mouths too badly, and wine that tasted like liquid smoke. "Tell me, Commander Morrison," High Regent Stormscale said during the meal, "what makes humans think they deserve to trade with beings as ancient and powerful as we are?" Jake had prepared for this question. "We may be young as a species, but humans have something valuable to offer. We adapt quickly, we solve problems in ways others don't expect, and we never give up when things get difficult." "Never give up?" Stormscale's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Interesting. We shall have to test that claim." The High Regent raised one massive claw, and Jake noticed that several dragons around the room shifted position slightly. Something was about to happen, but he couldn't tell what. As is traditional when meeting new species, Stormscale announced loudly, "We must determine the true character of our guests. Commander Morrison, would you do us the honor of drinking from the goblet of truth?" A servant dragon brought forward an ornate cup made of what looked like crystallized fire. Jake looked at Lisa and Alex, who both nodded slightly. Refusing would probably end the diplomatic mission before it really started. Jake stood up and reached for the goblet. As soon as his fingers touched the crystal surface, he felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. The last thing he heard before falling was the thunderous laughter of hundreds of dragons echoing through the chamber. Jake hit the ground hard and rolled to absorb the impact like his military training had taught him. The air was knocked out of his lungs, but nothing felt broken. He lay still for a moment, listening to the echoes of dragon laughter coming from somewhere far above his head. When he finally stood up and looked around, Jake realized he was in some kind of prison cell. The walls were made of black volcanic rock that had been polished smooth as glass. Strange symbols were carved deep into the stone, and they seemed to glow with a faint blue light that hurt his eyes. When he looked directly at them, the cell was about 30 feet wide and 30 feet long, with walls that stretched up into darkness. Above, Jake couldn't see the ceiling even when he craned his neck back as far as it would go. The only light came from those glowing symbols and a few patches on the walls that seemed to shine with their own inner fire. "Do not worry, little human." High Regent Stormscale's voice boomed down from somewhere in the darkness above. "You are perfectly safe in our detention chamber. This is merely a traditional test of character that we perform on all potential allies." Jake heard more dragon laughter echoing around him. "How long does this test usually last?" He called back. Oh, that depends entirely on you," came the reply. "Some beings break within hours. Others have lasted days before they learned proper humility. The record is held by a creature from the Andromeda Galaxy who lasted nearly a week before begging for release. And what happened to him? He became our most trusted trade partner." Stormscale sounded very pleased with himself. Amazing how a little time in solitude can teach one respect for their betters. The laughter faded, and Jake was left alone in the glowing cell. He walked around the perimeter, running his hands along the walls to look for any weakness or hidden door. The stone was perfectly smooth and felt warm to the touch. When he pressed against it, the walls didn't budge even slightly. Above ground, Lisa and Alex were trying to negotiate with the dragons for Jake's release. They had been moved to a comfortable room with soft cushions and warm food, but both humans were too worried to enjoy the hospitality. "This is completely unacceptable," Lisa said to the dragon diplomat who had been assigned to watch them. "Commander Morrison is here on an official diplomatic mission. You cannot simply imprison him because..." You think it's funny. The dragon, who had introduced himself as Flame Singer Copper Wing, seemed genuinely confused by her anger. But this is how we have always tested new species. The cell is completely safe, and your friend will be released as soon as he shows proper respect for draconian superiority. Alex looked up from the tablet, where she had been frantically searching through their research. How long has that cell been in use? Oh, many thousands of years, Copperwing replied proudly. It was built by our ancestors to hold the most dangerous criminals and prisoners of war. The walls are reinforced with quantum-locked energy fields that prevent any form of escape or energy manipulation. Lisa felt a cold knot form in her stomach. What kind of prisoners? Beings of immense power, Copperwing said, clearly enjoying the chance to brag about his people's achievements. Cosmic entities that could destroy planets with their thoughts. Energy beings that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Reality warpers who could bend space and time to their will. All of them were held safely in that cell until they learned their place. Alex and Lisa exchanged worried glances. They both knew something about Jake that the dragons clearly didn't. Something that made putting him in any kind of prison cell an extremely bad idea. Down in the cell, Jake had finished his exploration and found exactly what he expected to find. Nothing. No hidden switches. No weak spots in the walls. No convenient air vents large enough for a human to crawl through. The Draconians had built this place to hold beings far more powerful than any normal human, and they had done their job. Well, Jake sat down in the center of the cell and closed his eyes. He began to breathe in the slow, controlled pattern that he had learned during his classified training on Earth. Most humans would have panicked or exhausted themselves trying to break down the walls. But Jake wasn't most humans. Hours passed. The dragons monitored him through hidden viewing crystals built into the walls, expecting to see him pace around the cell or shout demands for release. Instead, they watched in growing confusion as he remained perfectly still in the same position. What is he doing? Asked a young dragon named Scale Bright Silvertail. Meditating, I think, replied Copperwing. Some species do this when they are frightened or confused. He will break soon enough. But Jake didn't break. As the hours turned into a full day, he remained motionless in the center of the cell. His breathing never changed from that slow, steady rhythm. His expression stayed calm and peaceful, as if he was sitting in a garden instead of an alien prison. High Regent Stormscale was beginning to feel annoyed. How long can one small human possibly meditate? He grumbled to his advisors. Surely he must be getting hungry or thirsty by now. Perhaps humans are more resilient than we thought, suggested Flame Singer Brassclaw, one of the older dragons on the council. Nonsense, Stormscale snorted, sending small flames shooting from his nostrils. They are tiny, weak creatures with ridiculously short lifespans. This one is simply more stubborn than most. Give him another day, and he will be crying for mercy like all the others. But something strange was happening in the cell that none of the dragons had noticed yet. The temperature, which had been carefully maintained at a level that would be uncomfortably warm for most species, was slowly starting to drop. The energy fields that had contained cosmic entities for thousands of years were beginning to flicker almost imperceptibly. Deep beneath the mountain, seismic monitors registered tiny tremors that had no geological explanation. The readings were so small that they might have been equipment errors, but they followed a pattern that matched Jake's breathing exactly. Alex noticed it first. She had been monitoring Jake through every instrument the Unity possessed, and what she was seeing made her blood run cold. "Lisa," she whispered, grabbing the captain's arm. "We have a serious problem." Lisa looked at the readings on Alex's tablet and felt the world tilt around her. How is that possible? The energy signatures alone should be impossible for any human to generate. Not any human, Alex said quietly. But Jake isn't exactly a normal diplomat, is he? Both women knew about Jake's real background, though they had hoped it would never become relevant. The dragons thought they were testing the character of a simple human diplomat. They had no idea they had just locked one of Earth's most dangerous secrets in a cell designed to contain cosmic-level threats, and that secret was starting to wake up. The first crack appeared in the quantum-locked barrier at exactly 36 hours after Jake had been thrown into the cell. It was tiny, no bigger than a hair, but it sent warning signals racing through the dragon's monitoring systems like wildfire. Flamesinger. Copperwing stared at the readings in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered, checking the instruments again. "These barriers have held for over 3,000 years. Nothing has ever even scratched them before. High Regent Stormscale was summoned immediately." The massive dragon's eyes blazed with anger and confusion as he studied the data. "Run a full diagnostic on all systems," he ordered. "There must be some malfunction in the equipment." But even as he spoke, a second crack appeared, then a third. The fractures spread across the energy field like a spider web, and with each new break came a sound that made every dragon in the facility freeze with primal terror. It wasn't the roar of some great beast or the scream of metal being torn apart. It was silence. Complete, absolute silence that seemed to eat the very air around it. The kind of quiet that existed in the spaces between stars. Cold and empty and wrong. Jake's eyes opened for the first time in over a day, when the monitoring dragons looked at him through their viewing crystals. They stepped back in alarm. His pupils had expanded to perfect black circles that reflected no light at all. The air around him shimmered like heat waves, but the temperature in the cell had dropped nearly freezing. "What is happening to him?" whispered Scale-Bright Silvertail, her voice shaking with fear. She didn't understand. No one had an answer. Above ground, Alex was frantically trying to contact Earth through the Unity's long-range communications array. Her hands shook as she entered the emergency codes that would reach the most classified military installations on their home planet. "This is Dr. Alex Turner aboard the diplomatic vessel Unity," she transmitted. "Authorization code Omega-77 Black. I need to speak with Project Void Command immediately." The response came back within minutes, encrypted so heavily that it took the ship's computer several seconds to decode it. A stern face appeared on the screen, wearing the uniform of Earth's Deep Space Command. "Dr. Turner, this is General Kate Harrison. Why are you using Omega-level codes in an unsecured system?" "Because Jake Morrison has been imprisoned by the Draconians, and he's starting to access his abilities," Alex said quickly. "The energy readings are off the charts. If this continues, he could destabilize the entire planet." General Harrison's expression went from annoyed to horrified in seconds. "How long has he been contained?" 36 hours and counting." "Dear God." Harrison turned to someone off-screen. "Get me a direct line to the president. And wake up everyone. In the Void program, we may have a code black situation." She looked back at Alex. "Doctor, you need to get Morrison out of there right now. I don't care what it takes or who you have to fight. If he fully awakens, the consequences could be catastrophic." Down in the cell, Jake slowly rose to his feet. As he did, pieces of stone began to lift from the floor around him, defying gravity as they rotated in lazy circles like tiny planets orbiting a dark star. The glowing symbols carved into the walls pulsed faster, their blue light flickering in rhythm with Jake's heartbeat. Regent Stormscale was no longer angry. The ancient dragon had lived long enough to recognize true danger when he saw it, and every instinct he possessed was screaming at him to run. "What manner of creature is this human?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Flamesinger Brassclaw, the oldest dragon on the council, studied the readings with growing alarm. These energy patterns I have seen something like this before in the most ancient texts. Beings that existed before the current universe was born. Entities that survived the collapse of previous realities. That's impossible, Stormscale protested. Humans are a young species. They have barely developed space travel. Then explain this. Grassclaw gestured toward the monitors showing Jake. Floating several inches above the cell floor, while reality warped around him like water dot, the mountain itself began to shake. Not the regular tremors of volcanic activity that the dragons were used to, but something deeper and more fundamental. As if the very foundations of space and time were being stretched out of shape. Lisa burst into the monitoring chamber without, waiting for permission, followed closely by Alex. Both women were armed with weapons from the Unity, though they knew that guns would be useless against dragons. You have to let him out right now, Lisa demanded, pointing her weapon at Stormscale, even though it made her feel ridiculous. You don't understand what you're dealing with? Explain it to me then, Stormscale replied, his attention split between the humans and the increasingly disturbing readings from the cell. Alex stepped forward, her scientific training overriding her fear. Humans aren't from this universe originally. We're refugees from a reality that died billions of years ago. Most of us have forgotten our true nature, but a few still carry the genetic memory of what we used to be. The dragons stared at her. In shock, Copperwing was the first to find his voice. What did you used to be? Survivors, Alex said simply. Beings that learned to exist in the spaces between universes when our original cosmos collapsed. We call it the void, and Jake has been trained to access it. As if responding to her words, the remaining barriers around Jake's cell shattered like glass. The sound echoed through the mountain with such force that several dragons were knocked from their feet. Emergency alarms began wailing as structural damage reports flooded in from all levels of the facility. Jake's voice came through the monitoring system, but it sounded different now, deeper, with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. I tried to warn you through our diplomatic protocols. Humans don't respond well to imprisonment. The cell walls began to crack and crumble, but instead of falling down, the pieces of stone hung in the air around Jake like a miniature asteroid field. The ancient symbols glowed brighter and brighter until they were painful to look at directly. We've spent millions of years learning to suppress what we truly are, Jake continued, his words carrying impossible distances without any technological amplification. We came to your galaxy as refugees, not conquerors. We just wanted to live in peace, among species that exist fully within normal space and time. High Regent Stormscale felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2,000 years of life. True, bone-deep terror. What happens if we don't release you? Jake's laugh was like the sound of stars being born and dying all at once. You can't release me anymore. The cell is gone. The question now is whether I can remember how to contain myself before I accidentally tear a hole in your planet. The mountain shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the ceiling of the monitoring chamber, and dust rained down on the gathered dragons and humans. Lisa activated her communicator with shaking hands. Jake, this is Lisa. You need to pull back. Remember your training. Remember why we're here. For a moment that seemed to last forever, the only sound was the groaning of stressed stone and metal. Then, slowly, the floating debris began to settle. Back to the floor. The temperature started to return to normal. The impossible harmonics faded from Jake's voice. I'm okay, Lisa, he said, sounding almost normal again. But I think we need to have a different kind of conversation with our hosts. High Regent Stormscale ordered Jake's immediate release, though there wasn't much left to release him from. The cell that had once contained cosmic entities was now a sphere of twisted metal and stone, with Jake standing calmly in the center. as if nothing unusual had happened. When the rescue team reached him, Jake looked completely normal. No strange energy fields, no floating debris, no reality distortions. Just a tired human diplomat in a slightly wrinkled uniform, who smiled politely and thanked them for their concern. But the dragons would never forget what they had witnessed. The monitoring recordings showed impossible things that challenged everything. They thought they knew about physics and reality. Young dragons who had watched the footage were having nightmares about the spaces between stars. Jake walked into the main council chamber, where hundreds of dragons waited in tense silence. His footsteps echoed in the vast space, and many of the assembled creatures flinched at the sound despite themselves. High Regent Stormscale had called for a full assembly of the most important dragons on Araxis Prime, ancient beings who remembered. The rise and fall of entire civilizations sat on stone perches, their eyes following Jake's every movement with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Honored dragons," Jake began, his voice carrying easily through the chamber without any technological amplification. "I believe we got off to a rough start. Perhaps we should try again." Stormscale cleared his massive throat, a sound like distant thunder. "Commander Morrison, my species owes you an apology. We had no idea what we were dealing with. Your people. What are you exactly?" Jake looked around at the assembled dragons, seeing fear and confusion in their ancient eyes. He had hoped this moment would never come, but the Draconians had forced his hand. "We are what's left," he said simply. "The last survivors of a universe that died long before yours was born." Lisa and Alex entered the chamber and took positions behind Jake. Both women looked calm, but ready for trouble. They knew that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity would find allies among the dragons, or would have to find a new place to call home. Flamesinger Brassclaw, the oldest dragon present, leaned forward on his perch. "Survivors. Of what, exactly?" Alex stepped forward, her scientific background making her the natural choice to explain complex concepts. Every universe eventually comes to an end. Stars burn out, black holes evaporate, even the fundamental particles decay into nothing. When that happened to our original reality, most life simply ceased to exist. "But not humans?" asked Copperwing. "Not the beings who would eventually become humans," Jake corrected. "Our ancestors learned to step outside of normal space and time. They found the spaces that exist between realities, the places where the laws of physics don't quite apply the same way." He paused and looked at the dragons' confused faces. "Imagine you're in a house when it burns down. Most people would die in the fire, but a few might find a way to step outside the house entirely, into a place that isn't quite inside and isn't quite outside. That's what our ancestors did when our universe collapsed." Scalebright Silvertail, who was still young by dragon standards, raised a trembling claw. "How long did you live in these?" "Between spaces? Millions of years," Lisa answered. "Long enough to forget most of what we used to be. Long enough to evolve and change until we could survive in normal reality again. When we finally found this universe and entered it, we were no longer the same species that had fled the dying cosmos." Stormscale's eyes blazed with sudden understanding. "That's why confinement affects you so badly. You spent eons as prisoners of the void between worlds." Jake nodded grimly. "Any kind of cage or prison triggers genetic memories that go back to the beginning of our species. Most humans never experience it because they never encounter barriers designed to contain cosmic-level beings. But when you put us in a cell like that, you remember what you used to be." Brassclaw finished, his voice filled with awe and terror. "We try not to," Alex said. "Every human is born with suppressors built into our genetic code, mental blocks that keep us from accessing our full abilities. It's better for everyone, including us, if we stay normal. But the suppressors can fail." Jake added, Extreme stress, life-threatening situations, or certain types of confinement can break through the blocks. When that happens, we become something closer to what our ancestors were. A younger dragon named Firewing Brightscale spoke up from the back of the assembly. What were your ancestors like? Jake and his companions exchanged glances. This was the part of the story that even they found hard to believe sometimes. They could manipulate space and time like you might shape clay, Lisa said carefully. They existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They could step from one end of the galaxy to another without using ships. They were, for lack of a better word, gods. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the sound of breathing seemed to stop as hundreds of dragons processed this information. Stormscale was the first to speak. And all humans carry this potential? To some degree, yes, Jake replied, though most will never access even a fraction of it. The genetic suppressors are very effective, and modern humans live comfortable lives that don't require cosmic-level abilities. How many of you know the truth? Asked Copper-Wing.Alex answered this time. A few thousand spread across Earth's population. Scientists, military personnel, diplomats like Jake, who might encounter situations where the knowledge becomes necessary. We call ourselves the Void Program. And your governments know? The highest levels do, Lisa confirmed. It's why humanity has been so careful about first contact with other species. We're genuinely trying to be peaceful neighbors, but we wanted to make sure we could trust new allies before revealing what we're capable of. Flame Singer Brassclaw shifted on his perch, his ancient mind working through the implications. This is why you offered to trade with us, despite being such a young species. You're not really young at all. We're older than most civilizations in this galaxy, Jake agreed. But we're also newcomers in a way. We've only been in this reality for about 50,000 Earth years, which is barely an instant by cosmic standards. High Regent Stormscale stood to his full impressive height and looked down at the three humans. What do you want from us, survivors of the void? Jake smiled, and for a moment his expression carried the weight of eons. The same thing we've always wanted, a place to call home. Friends who won't try to lock us in cages. Maybe some decent trade agreements that benefit both our peoples. The dragon leader was quiet for a long moment, considering. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new tone of respect that hadn't been there before. I think we can work something out. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything the Draconians had ever experienced. Instead of the usual posturing and displays of superiority that marked most diplomatic meetings, the dragons found themselves dealing with beings who were polite, reasonable, and absolutely terrifying when provoked. High Regent Stormscale had called in his most experienced trade negotiators, ancient dragons who had been making deals since before most star systems were born. But every time they tried to use their traditional tactics of intimidation and superiority, they remembered the footage of Jake standing in the ruins of their most secure prison cell. Perhaps we should discuss mining rights first, suggested Flame Singer Copperwing, his voice much more respectful than it had been before the incident. Jake nodded and consulted the tablet Lisa had given him. We're particularly interested in rare metals that don't exist in our home system. Volcanic worlds like yours tend to have exactly what we need for our more advanced technologies. Advanced technologies? Asked Scale Bright Silvertail, who had been appointed as the youngest dragon representative to help bridge the generation gap. Alex smiled. Most of our technology is actually designed to help suppress our natural abilities. We've found that living like normal three-dimensional beings is much easier when you have machines to handle the things you might otherwise do instinctively. The dragons exchanged confused glances. Brassclaw leaned forward on his perch. You deliberately make your cells weaker? Not weaker, Jake corrected. More stable. Imagine if you could accidentally breathe fire every time you got angry or excited. You'd want some way to control that, wouldn't you? I suppose that makes sense, Stormscale rumbled thoughtfully. What do you offer in return for our rare metals? Lisa activated a holographic display that showed various human technologies. Agricultural techniques that could increase your food production by 300%. Medical knowledge that could extend even dragon lifespans by several centuries. And manufacturing processes that would let you build things you've only dreamed of. The presentations continued for hours, but the real negotiations were happening on a deeper level. The dragons were learning to see humans not as inferior creatures, to be dominated, but as potential equals who chose to appear harmless. The humans were demonstrating that they had no interest in conquest or domination, despite their enormous hidden power. During a break in the formal talks, Jake found himself alone with High Regent Stormscale on a balcony overlooking the volcanic landscape of Paraxis Prime. The massive dragons seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating now that he knew what Jake really was. I must ask, Stormscale said quietly, how many other species know your true nature? Jake watched the lava flows in the distance, their orange light reflecting off his face. Very few. The crystalline collective suspects something, but they think we're just unusually adaptable. The machine empire has some theories, but no proof. Most species we encounter see exactly what they expect to see. Young, curious humans who are eager to make friends. And that's how you prefer it. It's safer for everyone, Jake replied. When other species see us as harmless, they're more likely to give us a chance. When they know what we're capable of, they tend to react with fear or aggression. Stormscale considered this, yet you revealed yourselves to us. Jake smiled. You forced our hand with that little test of yours. But honestly, I'm glad it happened. Draconians value strength and honesty, which makes you ideal partners for this kind of secret. You won't try to exploit the knowledge or use it against us. How? Can you be so certain? Because you're old enough to understand the consequences, Jake said simply. Young species might try to capture and study us, or attempt to use us as weapons. But dragons have seen empires rise and fall. You know that making enemies of reality warpers is a really bad idea. The dragon leader chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. Indeed, we would much rather have you as friends. When the negotiations resumed, the tone had shifted completely. Instead of trying to get the better deal, both sides worked together to create agreements that would benefit everyone. The dragons would provide rare metals and access to volcanic energy sources. Humans would share agricultural techniques and medical knowledge. But more importantly, they would share something much more valuable, mutual respect and genuine friendship between their peoples. As the formal signing ceremony approached, Jake received an encrypted message from Earth. General Harrison's face appeared on his private communicator, looking relieved, but still worried. Jake, we've been monitoring the situation from here. How did the dragons take the revelation? Better than expected, Jake replied. They're old enough and wise enough to understand the implications. I think we may have found our first true allies in this galaxy. Any signs of them wanting to spread the information to other species? Jake shook his head. Stormscale understands the need for secrecy. Dragons are naturally territorial and protective of valuable information. They'll guard our secret as carefully as they guard their own. Good. The President sends his congratulations on handling a very difficult situation. Try not to break any more prison cells, will you? Jake laughed. I'll do my best, General. The signing ceremony took place in the same great hall where Jake had first been trapped. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. High Regent Stormscale signed the treaty documents with a claw dipped in molten gold, while Jake used a simple pen that looked almost absurdly small by comparison. May this alliance bring prosperity to both our peoples, Stormscale declared formally. And may we never again test each other's patience in quite the same way. Jake added, drawing laughter from the assembled dragon's dot as the Unity prepared to. Depart Paraxis Prime. Jake stood on the bridge, watching the volcanic world shrink behind them. Lisa joined him at the observation window. Any regrets about revealing our secret? She asked. Jake shook his head. The dragons needed to know what they were dealing with if we were going to be true allies. Besides, I have a feeling this won't be the last time our secret comes out. As humanity spreads across the galaxy, we're going to encounter more situations where hiding our true nature becomes impossible. Alex approached them with a datapad full of readings from their visit. The energy signatures from Jake's awakening are still detectable on the planet's surface. Any species with advanced sensors who visits Paraxis Prime in the next few years will know that something cosmic level happened there. Let them wonder, Jake said with a slight smile. Mystery can be just as effective as fear when it comes to keeping people from bothering you. Lisa nodded toward the communication station where messages were coming in from Earth. Command wants a full report on everything that happened. They're particularly interested in how the dragons reacted to learning about the Void program. Tell them the truth, Jake replied, that we found a species old enough and wise enough to handle the knowledge responsibly. The dragons won't betray our secret, but they also won't hesitate to remind other species that humans are under their protection now. As if summoned by their conversation, High Regent Stormscale's image appeared on the main screen. A massive dragon looked pleased, despite the formal setting of the communication. Commander Morrison, I wanted to speak with you once more before you depart our system. My council has been discussing the implications of our new alliance, and we have a proposal. Jake straightened slightly. We're listening, High Regent. The galaxy is full of young, aggressive species who might view humans as potential prey or tools to be exploited. With your permission, we would like to spread certain carefully chosen rumors about humanity's capabilities. Nothing specific, but enough to make other species think twice before testing you. Lisa and Alex exchanged glances. This was an unexpected offer, but potentially very valuable. What kind of rumors? Jake asked carefully. Stormscale's eyes glittered with amusement. Oh, nothing too dramatic. Perhaps stories about human diplomats who can make prison cells disappear. Tales of a species that survived the death of their original universe. The kind of legends that make people nervous without giving away any real secrets. Jake couldn't help but laugh. You want to turn us into galactic boogeyman stories? Precisely. Fear is an excellent deterrent, and it's much more effective than having to actually demonstrate your abilities every time some foolish species decides to test you. The proposal made sense from a strategic standpoint. If other species believed humans were dangerous, they would be more likely to approach with respect rather than aggression. It would also reduce the chances of humans being forced to reveal their true nature in hostile situations. We'll need to discuss this with our government, Jake said diplomatically. But I think you'll find they're very interested in your proposal. Excellent. Oh, and Commander, the next time you visit Paraxis Prime, we'll make sure to have more appropriate accommodations prepared. No more prison cells, I promise. The transmission ended, and Jake found himself surrounded by his crew, all of whom were grinning at the absurdity of the situation. So we went from being unknown newcomers to galactic legends in the space of 3 days, Lisa observed. That might be some kind of record. Dr. Turner was already making notes for her report. The psychological impact of this approach could be remarkable. Instead of having to prove, oh,